Her small feet pounded against the wet pavement as she ran through the rain-soaked streets. Tears mixed with rainwater streamed down her dark cheeks, her braided hair coming undone with each desperate step. Her yellow sundress clung to her thin frame, torn at the shoulder, revealing scraped knees underneath. One of her pink sneakers was missing, left behind somewhere in her frantic flight through the night. She burst through the heavy glass doors of the upscale lounge, her tiny voice cutting through the smooth jazz music and the sophisticated clinking of crystal glasses. "Please, they're beating my mama." Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every eye in the luxurious establishment turned toward the trembling child standing in the doorway, water dripping from her clothes onto the pristine marble floor. The contrast was jarring. This small, disheveled girl in a place where a single cocktail cost more than most people spent on groceries. But the man she locked eyes with was no ordinary businessman enjoying an evening drink. He was Park Jin-woo, the most ruthless Korean mafia boss in Atlanta, a man whose name alone could make seasoned criminals reconsider their life choices. And what he did next would change 3 lives forever, rippling through Atlanta's underworld in ways no one could have predicted. Before we continue with this story that will shock you to the core, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. It was a humid Friday night in Atlanta's Buckhead District, 2015. The summer air was thick enough to cut with a knife, carrying the scent of magnolias and approaching rain. The Lotus Room was an exclusive lounge tucked away on a side street, the kind of place that didn't advertise its existence because the right people already knew where to find it. Here, the city's elite gathered for expensive cocktails and even more expensive deals. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, while well-dressed patrons discussed million-dollar contracts in hushed tones that wouldn't carry to neighboring tables. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over everything, creating an atmosphere of old money and older secrets. This wasn't just any establishment. This was Park Jin-woo's territory, a neutral ground where power brokers came to see and be seen, where favors were traded like currency, and where the unspoken rule was absolute discretion. The staff knew to keep their ears closed and their mouths shut. The patrons understood that what was discussed at the Lotus Room stayed at the Lotus Room. Violate that trust, and you'd find yourself persona non grata in Atlanta's power circles, or worse. Jin-woo sat in his private corner booth, positioned so he could see every entrance and exit without obstruction. He was a lean man in his late 40s with sharp, handsome features that spoke of both intelligence and danger. His black hair was styled perfectly, with just enough gray at the temples to suggest wisdom and experience. His eyes were dark and penetrating, the kind that seemed to look straight through people and catalog their weaknesses, their fears, their potential usefulness. Those eyes missed nothing, a trait that had kept him alive in a business where mistakes were often fatal. He had built his empire from nothing, arriving in America at 19 with $200 in his pocket, a fake ID, and a determination to never be powerless again. His family and soul had disowned him after he'd gotten involved with the wrong crowd, so he'd left with nothing but the clothes on his back and a burning ambition that bordered on obsession. The first years had been brutal. Washing dishes in Korean restaurants, sleeping in his car, fighting his way up through the ranks of organizations that didn't trust outsiders. But Jin-woo had been patient, strategic, and when necessary, absolutely ruthless. Now, at 47, he controlled a network that stretched from Atlanta to Los Angeles, with connections in Seoul, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. His operation was sophisticated: money laundering through legitimate businesses, high-level protection services, exclusive gambling operations for the wealthy, and carefully managed distribution networks that kept violence to a minimum. He wasn't a street thug. He was a businessman who happened to operate outside the law, And he ran his empire with the precision of a Fortune 500 CEO. His tailored Tom Ford suit probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, not a Rolex, which he considered too obvious, caught the ambient lighting as he lifted his whiskey glass. The 25-year-old Japanese whiskey inside cost $500 a pour, but Jinwoo barely tasted it. He drank not for pleasure but for the ritual, the appearance of casual confidence that was essential in his line of work. Tonight's meeting was routine, discussing distribution territories with his top lieutenants. To his left sat Marcus Washington, his head of security, a former Marine who'd found civilian life unsatisfying and Jin Woo's employment much more lucrative. To his right was Kim Min-jun, his cousin and second in command, who joined him from Seoul 5 years ago. Across the table sat three regional managers, each responsible for different aspects of the operation. They discussed numbers, percentages, potential problems with the kind of calm efficiency that had made Jin Woo's organization the most successful in the Southeast. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned, precisely as Jin Woo had orchestrated it. He prided himself on control, on anticipating every variable, on never being surprised. It was this methodical approach that had allowed him to outlast flashier, more violent competitors who'd burned bright and fast before flaming out in prison or unmarked graves, until the door exploded open with a crash that made half the patrons jump. The little girl who stumbled inside looked no older than 8, though she might have been small for her age. Her yellow sundress, probably cheerful and bright this morning, was now torn at the shoulder and stained with dirt and something that might have been blood. Her dark skin was scraped and bruised, particularly visible on her knobby knees underneath the hem of her dress. One of her pink sneakers was missing, and her bare foot left wet prints on the marble floor. Her hair, done up in neat braids with colorful beads this morning, now hung in a tangled mess around her face, several braids completely undone. But it was her eyes that struck Jinwoo like a physical blow, wide, terrified, yet burning with a desperate determination that reminded him painfully of someone from long ago. Those eyes swept the room frantically, searching for something, someone, anyone who might help. They were the eyes of a child who'd run out of options and was making one last desperate gamble. "Please," she cried out, her voice cracking with emotion and exhaustion. "They're beating my mama. She's gonna die." The lounge's security guard, a large man named Thomas who'd been a bouncer at various establishments for 20 years, rushed toward her from his position by the door. His face showed both concern for the child and panic about the disruption she was causing to the lounge's carefully maintained atmosphere of exclusive tranquility. He was already apologizing profusely to the patrons for the disturbance, assuring them that the situation would be handled immediately, that such interruptions were absolutely unprecedented. But before Thomas could reach the child, her eyes found Jin Woo's across the crowded room. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Jin Woo, who'd built his reputation on being unreadable, felt something crack inside his carefully constructed walls. The girl's gaze locked onto his with an intensity that transcended her years, as if she could sense something about him that others missed. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way everyone else in the room seemed to defer to him unconsciously, giving his table a wide berth even when passing by. The way conversations lowered when he spoke. The way staff appeared instantly when he so much as glanced toward them. Or maybe it was something deeper. A child's uncanny ability to recognize the one person in that room who actually had the power to do something, who could make things happen with a single word. She ran straight toward him, her bare foot slapping against the marble floor, making a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the shocked silence that had fallen over the Lotus room. Thomas tried to intercept her, his large hand reaching for her shoulder, but she dodged with the desperate agility of a child running for her life. Jinwoo's bodyguard Marcus moved to intercept, rising from his seat with the smooth efficiency of a trained professional. But Jinwoo raised a single finger, stopping him mid-motion. Marcus froze immediately, though his expression showed confusion and concern. In 5 years of working for Jinwoo, he'd never seen his boss allow anyone to approach uninvited, let alone a strange child. The little girl reached Jinwoo's table and grabbed the edge with both hands, her small fingers trembling against the polished wood. Up close, Jinwoo could see more details that made his chest tighten. Her lip was split and bleeding slightly. There were finger-shaped bruises on her upper arm as if someone had grabbed her roughly. Her breathing came in ragged gasps, suggesting she'd been running for some time. "They're hurting her real bad," she sobbed, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. "Please, mister, please help my mama. They won't stop. They just keep hitting her and hitting her." The silence in the lounge was absolute. Every patron, every staff member, every one of Jinwoo's lieutenants stared at this unprecedented scene. Some of the patrons looked uncomfortable, unused to being confronted with raw human desperation in their gilded sanctuary. Others looked away, embarrassed or unwilling to get involved in what was clearly a messy situation. Jinwoo's lieutenants exchanged glances, unsure how their boss would handle this disruption to carefully planned business. Jinwoo looked down at this child who had somehow found the courage to interrupt the most dangerous man in Atlanta. Her brown eyes pleaded with him, tears rolling down her cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the dirt on her face. She was shaking, whether from cold, fear, or exhaustion. He couldn't tell. Probably all three. But despite her terror, despite being in a strange place surrounded by dangerous-looking men in expensive suits, she hadn't given up. She stood there, clutching his table, refusing to be dismissed. Something shifted in Jinwoo's chest, a feeling he thought he'd buried 15 years ago, sealed away behind walls of ice and calculation. It was a feeling he'd sworn never to experience again, because feeling meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got you killed in his world. "What's your name?" Jinwoo asked, his accented English softer than anyone in that room had ever heard it. His lieutenant's eyes widened slightly. Even his cousin Minjun looked surprised. "Amara," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Amara Williams. My mama's name is Keisha Williams. Please, mister, please. I don't got nobody else to ask." The name meant nothing to Jinwoo. He didn't know any Keisha Williams, had no business dealings with anyone by that name. This woman wasn't part of his world, wasn't connected to his organization in any way. By all the rules he'd lived by for the past 15 years, he should dismiss this child, have Thomas escort her out gently but firmly. Perhaps call the police anonymously to handle whatever domestic situation had sent her running through the streets. But looking at Amara, he didn't see a stranger's child. He saw Ji-eun's face, his baby sister. She had been only 10 years old when gang violence had torn through their neighborhood in Los Angeles, where he'd been trying to establish himself. It had been a territorial dispute, stupid and senseless, the kind that erupted regularly in areas where young men with guns thought violence proved manhood. Ji-eun had run to him for help that night too, bursting into the restaurant where he'd been meeting with potential partners. She'd been crying, saying their apartment was under fire, that their mother was hiding in the bathtub, that she'd run through the gunfire to find him. He'd run then, abandoned the meeting, sprinted through the streets with Ji-eun clinging to his back. But he'd been too far away, too late. By the time he reached their building, the shooting had stopped. Their mother was safe, but traumatized. But Ji-eun, who'd made that desperate run to find him, collapsed from blood loss before the ambulance arrived. She'd been hit while running to him, a stray bullet catching her in the back. She'd run half a mile, bleeding internally, driven by pure desperation and love for their mother. She died holding his hand, whispering that she knew he'd come, that she'd known he'd save them. That loss had transformed him from a struggling immigrant trying to find his place in America's criminal underworld into the cold, calculating man everyone feared today. He'd built his empire on the ashes of his grief, promising himself he'd never be powerless again, never be too late again, never care about anyone enough that their loss could destroy him. He'd sealed away every soft emotion, every vulnerability, every connection to his former self. Park Jin-woo had been born from the ruins of the boy who couldn't save his sister. But looking at Amara, he saw Ji-eun's face, heard his sister's voice in this child's desperate plea, felt the same helpless rage at a world where children had to run through dangerous streets begging strangers for help because the systems that should protect them had failed. Where? Jin-woo asked simply, his voice carrying absolute command despite its quietness. The parking lot behind Morrison Street, Amara said quickly, her words tumbling over each other in her rush to get them out. The old laundromat, the one that's been closed forever. They said Mama owed money, but she don't got none. They said her boyfriend owed them, but Tyrone left months ago. Mama don't even know where he went. They just keep hitting her, saying she gotta pay what he owes. But we don't got nothing, mister. We barely got food money. Jin-woo was already standing, his lieutenant's eyes widening in shock. In 15 years of working with him, in countless meetings and negotiations and even violent confrontations, they'd never seen their boss move with such urgency for anyone outside his organization. He was always calculating, always thinking 3 steps ahead, always weighing costs and benefits before committing to action. Marcus, bring the car. Now. Jin-woo's voice carried the weight of absolute command, the tone that meant questions were not welcome and delays would not be tolerated. Marcus moved immediately, pulling out his phone to alert the driver. Min-jun stood as well, instinctively understanding that whatever was about to happen, Jin-woo would need backup. Jin-woo looked down at Amara, and for just a moment, his expression softened in a way that would have shocked anyone who knew his reputation. "Show me," he said. Then, to Thomas the security guard, "Call Detective Chen. Tell him Park Jin-woo requests his immediate assistance at the old Morrison Street laundromat. Tell him it's urgent." Detective James Chen was one of several police officers on Jin-woo's payroll, providing protection and information in exchange for generous monthly payments. Jin-woo had no intention of handling this situation without proper legal cover. He wasn't a thug. He was a businessman, and businessmen documented everything. The drive took 7 minutes through Atlanta's wet streets. The rain had started in earnest now, drumming on the roof of Jin-woo's black Mercedes S-Class. Amara sat in the back seat between Jin-woo and Marcus, pointing directions with shaking hands. Her small body seemed to be going into shock now that she'd found help. The adrenaline that had carried her through her desperate flight beginning to wear off. Jin-woo noticed she was shivering violently and shrugged off his suit jacket, draping it over her small shoulders. It swallowed her completely, but she clutched it gratefully. Through the rain-streaked windows, Jin-woo could see they were heading into the Mechanicsville neighborhood, one of Atlanta's most challenged areas. Poverty and crime were rampant here, the kind of place where legitimate opportunities were scarce, and illegitimate ones flourished. It was territory controlled by a local gang that had been encroaching on his business interests for months. The Southside crew, led by a man named Deshaun Dice Carter, had been flexing their muscles lately, trying to expand their territory and their operations. They'd been shaking down businesses, dealing drugs on corners that weren't theirs, recruiting aggressively in areas that had been neutral ground. Jin-woo had been planning to address the situation eventually, through the careful application of economic pressure and strategic demonstrations of power. He preferred to avoid direct violence when possible. It was messy, attracted attention, and was generally bad for business. That timeline had just accelerated dramatically. When they pulled into the crumbling parking lot behind the abandoned laundromat, Jin Woo saw exactly what Amara had described. The scene was illuminated by a single flickering streetlight that cast grotesque shadows across the wet pavement. Three men surrounded a woman who was on her knees in a puddle, trying to shield her face with her arms as they took turns kicking her. One of them held a metal pipe, tapping it against his palm between strikes. The woman, Keisha, was barely conscious, blood streaming from a cut above her eye, her lips split, her face already swelling. "Stay in the car," Jinwoo told Amara firmly, his voice brooking no argument. "Lock the doors. Marcus, give her your phone. If anything goes wrong, she calls 911. Marcus handed over his phone immediately, showing Amara how to unlock it and dial. Jinwoo saw the girl's eyes widen with fresh tears as she saw her mother through the window, but she nodded bravely, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Then Jinwoo stepped out into the rain, followed by Marcus and Minjun. Two more of his men emerged from a second car that had followed them, their presence adding weight to Jinwoo's intervention. The scene that unfolded next would become legendary in Atlanta's underworld, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy, but consistent in its essential truth. Jinwoo didn't shout, didn't announce himself with theatrical displays of power. He simply walked toward the three men with Marcus and his guards flanking him, his expensive dress shoes splashing through puddles without hesitation. His white shirt was getting soaked, his carefully styled hair plastered to his head, but his expression remained calm, almost bored. The attackers were so focused on Keisha, so absorbed in their systematic brutality, that they didn't notice until Jinwoo spoke. "Enough." The single word, delivered in that quiet Korean-accented voice, froze all three men mid-motion. There was something in that tone, something that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to primal survival instincts. It was the voice of someone who'd given orders that ended lives, who'd seen violence that would break ordinary men, who carried authority that went bone deep. The three men turned, and recognition dawned on their faces in stages. First confusion at the interruption, then growing awareness as they registered the expensive clothes and the professional bodyguards, then mounting fear as they recognized Park Jin-woo's face. Everyone in Atlanta's criminal world knew that face, had heard the stories, understood the implications of his personal attention. "Mr. Park," one of them stammered, a skinny man in his early 20s with elaborate tattoos covering his arms. "We didn't know. This ain't your... We wasn't told." "You're beating a woman in front of her child," Jin-woo interrupted, his tone conversational but carrying an undercurrent that made the temperature seem to drop. "What did she do that was worth traumatizing an 8-year-old girl? What crime justified making a child run through dangerous streets at night, begging strangers for help?" The three men exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain. They'd been following orders, doing what they always did, collecting debts through violence and intimidation. It was standard procedure in their world. But standing in front of Park Jin-woo, having their actions framed as traumatizing a child, they began to see their routine brutality through different eyes. "Dice said she owed money from her ex," the one with the pipe said, his voice defensive. "Tyrone Walker ran up debts all over, then disappeared. Dice said the woman gotta pay what her man owes. We were just following orders," Jin-woo finished, his voice dripping with contempt. "The excuse of cowards throughout history." He walked past them to Keisha, who was trying to push herself up from the wet pavement with trembling arms. Her face was a mess of blood and bruises, one eye already swollen shut. She looked up at Jin-woo with confusion and fear, clearly not understanding what was happening, why this well-dressed stranger was intervening in her nightmare. Gently, with a care that shocked his own men, Jin-woo helped her stand. She wobbled, barely able to support her own weight, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Mrs. Williams," he said quietly, "your daughter is very brave. She found help." You're safe now. At the mention of Amara, Keisha's good eye widened. Amara? Where? Is she? In my car. Safe. Warm. Waiting for you. Jinwoo looked at Marcus. Take Mrs. Williams to Dr. Kim. Tell him I sent her. Tell him I want her examined thoroughly. All injuries documented and photographed. Tell him money is no object. Dr. Kim Sung-ho ran a private clinic that catered to Jinwoo's organization, treating injuries that couldn't be taken to hospitals without awkward questions. But he was also a legitimate, highly skilled physician who'd fled Seoul after getting involved with the wrong people. He owed Jinwoo his life, his freedom, and his thriving practice. He would take excellent care of Keisha Williams. Marcus moved immediately to help Keisha toward the car. She resisted weakly, trying to see Amara, but Marcus spoke to her in low, reassuring tones, explaining that her daughter was safe, that everything would be okay now. Then Jinwoo turned back to the three attackers, and the temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees despite the humid Georgia night. The rain poured down harder, as if nature itself was responding to the shift in atmosphere. Jinwoo's wet shirt clung to his lean frame, and water dripped from his hair, but his eyes remained cold and focused. "What are your names?" he asked. The three men hesitated, glancing at each other. "I'm Devin," the skinny one with tattoos said. "This is Marcus." He indicated the one with the pipe, then corrected himself quickly. "I mean Dante, and that's Louis." Jinwoo nodded slowly. "Devin. Dante. Louis. Do you know who I am?" They nodded frantically. "Yes, sir, Mr. Park. Everyone knows you, sir." "Then you understand that when I give an order, it's not a suggestion. It's not negotiable." Jinwoo's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "Tell Dice I want a meeting, tonight, at the warehouse on Boulevard, and tell him to bring whatever money he thinks Keisha Williams owed, because he's about to pay it back triple. No, quadruple. With interest for the trauma he's caused." "Mr. Park," Devin said hesitantly, "Dice don't take orders from—" Jinwoo looked at him, and whatever Devin saw in those eyes made him step back involuntarily. "Then tell Dice that Park Jinwoo has taken a personal interest in this situation. Tell him that if he doesn't show up, I'll consider it a declaration of war. And trust me, gentlemen, that's a war he cannot win. I've been very patient with the Southside Crew's expansion efforts. I've allowed Dice to operate in areas that could be mine because I prefer peace to conflict. But that patience has limits." He let the silence stretch, watching fear bloom in their eyes. "Now go, and pray that Dice is smarter than you three." The three men practically ran to their cars, leaving their pipe behind in their haste. Jinwoo watched them go, then looked at Minjun. "Call our lawyers. I want them at the warehouse when Dice arrives. I want everything documented. Legal proceedings, consent forms, everything above board." Minjun nodded, already pulling out his phone. This was classic Jinwoo. Even when acting on emotion, he was covering all angles, ensuring that whatever happened next would have legal protection. 2 hours later, in a warehouse in East Atlanta that Jinwoo used for various business purposes, Dice Carter sat across from Jinwoo at a folding table. The contrast between them was striking. Dice was young, maybe 30, dressed in designer streetwear that probably cost a fortune, but looked cheap next to Jinwoo's tailored elegance. He had gold teeth that flashed when he talked, and enough jewelry to stock a small pawn shop. He carried himself with the artificial confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences, who'd built his reputation on intimidating people weaker than himself. Jinwoo had changed into dry clothes, another suit, this one charcoal gray, and looked as composed as if he'd just stepped out of a spa rather than a confrontation in the rain. Between them on the table sat a stack of documents prepared by Jinwoo's lawyers and a briefcase that Minjun had placed there. "Mr. Park," Dice said, trying to sound confident but not quite pulling it off. "With all respect, I don't understand why you're getting involved in this. This is street-level business. Tyrone Walker owed my organization over $15,000. The woman was his girl. That makes her responsible. Jinwoo didn't respond immediately. He opened the briefcase and pulled out several photographs. Dr. Kim had worked quickly, documenting every injury on Keisha Williams's body. Bruised ribs, a fractured orbital bone, contusions, lacerations. The photos were clinical, professional, and damning. These injuries, Jinwoo said quietly, spreading the photos across the table, were inflicted by your men on a woman who had nothing to do with Tyrone Walker's debts. A woman who was simply trying to survive and raise her daughter. Dice glanced at the photos and shrugged. Business is business. Sometimes people get hurt. That's the game. The game, Jinwoo repeated. He leaned back in his chair, studying Dice with the same intensity he might use to examine an insect. Tell me, Dice, how old were you when you started playing this game? 16. Why? And how many years have you been running the Southside crew? 5 years. We've grown a lot under my leadership. Doubled our territory, tripled our income. There was pride in Dice's voice. Impressive, Jinwoo said, though his tone suggested otherwise. 5 years. I've been in this business for 28 years. I've built an empire that spans multiple states. I've outlasted competitors who were richer, more violent, more connected. Do you know how I've survived so long? Dice didn't answer, sensing this wasn't really a question. I survived because I understand the difference between business and brutality. Because I know that sustainable power comes from being feared for the right reasons, not for random violence. Because I've learned that sometimes the most profitable move is the one that looks like mercy. Jinwoo leaned forward. You made a mistake tonight, Dice. You hurt a mother in front of her child. You traumatized an 8-year-old girl so badly that she ran through dangerous streets and burst into my establishment begging for help. Do you understand what that means? It means she's resourceful? Dice tried to joke. It means you created a situation so desperate that a child had to gamble her life on the mercy of a stranger. It means your organization is so undisciplined, so carelessly violent, that you're creating chaos that attracts attention. Police attention, federal attention. The kind of attention that makes everyone's business more difficult. Jinwoo pushed the photographs closer to Dice. In my culture, there's a concept called jong. It's difficult to translate, but it means a deep emotional connection, an affection that develops through shared experiences. Tonight, Amara Williams created jong between herself and me. She reminded me of someone I lost, someone I failed to protect. So now her well-being matters to me. Her mother's well-being matters to me. And anyone who threatens them, threatens me. He opened the briefcase wider, revealing stacks of cash. Here's what's going to happen. This briefcase contains $60,000. 4 times what you claim Tyrone Walker owed you. You're going to take this money and declare Keisha Williams's debt completely paid. You're going to spread the word throughout your organization that she and her daughter are under my protection. Anyone who bothers them, threatens them, or even looks at them wrong will answer to me personally. Dice stared at the money, then at Jinwoo. You're paying off her debt? I'm buying her peace of mind. I'm ensuring that Amara Williams never has to run through the streets terrified again. Consider it an investment in my own peace of mind. Jinwoo's voice hardened. But there's more. You're going to restructure your collection practices. No more beating women. No more confrontations in front of children. No more of this undisciplined chaos that you call business. You're going to professionalize your operation, or you're going to find yourself competing with me directly. And trust me, Dice, that's a competition you'll lose. You can't just come in here and dictate how I run my crew, Dice said, his pride finally overcoming his fear. Jinwoo smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Can't I? Let's think about this strategically. You operate primarily in Mechanicsville and parts of Pittsburgh. Your main income streams are drug distribution, protection rackets, and some minor gambling operations. You have maybe 50 active members, another 100 associates. Your annual revenue is probably around $2 million, most of which gets wasted on expensive cars and jewelry rather than invested intelligently. He paused, letting Dice process the fact that he knew these details. I control distribution networks worth $50 million annually. I have connections to suppliers you've never met and never will. I have police, lawyers, judges, and politicians in my pocket. If I decide to cut off your supply lines, you'll be out of business in a month. If I decide to flood your territory with cheaper, better product, your dealers will defect. If I decide to apply pressure through legal channels, you'll spend the next 5 years fighting charges that I've carefully constructed. Jin Woo's voice remained calm, conversational. Or we can work together. You professionalize your operation, stop attracting unnecessary attention, treat people with the basic decency that prevents desperate children from seeking help from strangers. In exchange, I don't crush you. I might even help you expand properly, teach you how to run a real organization. Think of it as mentorship. Dice sat in silence, his mind clearly racing through his options and finding them all limited. And if I say no, then you're declaring yourself an enemy of Park Jin-woo, and I will demonstrate exactly why that's a fatal mistake. I won't be dramatic about it. I won't send men to shoot up your corners or beat you in parking lots. I'll simply apply pressure at every level until your organization collapses from within. It'll be slow, methodical, and absolutely thorough. And when you're sitting in a federal prison, wondering how everything fell apart, you'll remember this moment and realize you had a choice. The warehouse fell silent except for the rain drumming on the metal roof. Dice looked at the money, at the photographs, at Jin Woo's impassive face. He was young and proud, but he wasn't stupid. He could feel the weight of Jin Woo's organization pressing down on him, could sense the vast difference between his street-level operation and Jin Woo's empire. The woman and her kid are under your protection, Dice said finally. The debt is paid, and I'll think about what you said, about professionalizing. You'll do more than think about it, Jin Woo said. Starting next week, you'll meet with my operations manager. He'll help you set up proper accounting systems, legitimate business fronts, disciplined collection practices. You'll learn how to run an organization that makes money without creating chaos. He stood, indicating the meeting was over. Take the money, Dice. Make the right announcements. And remember that Amara Williams is under my personal protection. If anything happens to her, or her mother, if they trip on a sidewalk crack, I'll hold you personally responsible. After Dice left, clutching the briefcase like a life preserver, Min Jun approached Jin Woo. Cousin, he said in Korean, that was generous. Some might say, too generous. Jin Woo looked at him, and Min Jun saw something in his eyes he'd never seen before. A hint of old pain, of wounds that had never fully healed. I was too late once, Jin Woo said quietly, also in Korean. I failed someone who ran to me for help. I won't make that mistake again. 3 months later, the transformation was remarkable. Keisha Williams stood behind the counter of Amara's Bakery, a small but beautifully renovated shop in a newly renovated building in Mechanicsville. The space had been an abandoned restaurant before Jin Woo's real estate development company purchased it, renovated it, and offered Keisha a lease at a rate that was suspiciously affordable. The terms were generous: low rent, flexible payment schedules, even a business development loan to help with equipment and supplies. Keisha had been reluctant at first, unsure why this powerful man was taking such interest in her life. But Jin Woo had been patient, explaining through his lawyer that he simply wanted to ensure Amara grew up in a stable environment. The bakery had been Keisha's dream for years, something she'd talked about, but never had the resources to pursue. Now, inexplicably, it was real. The bakery had become a neighborhood fixture quickly. Keisha's red velvet cupcakes were legendary, her peach cobbler sold out almost daily, and her made-to-order birthday cakes were booked weeks in advance. She employed 3 other women from the neighborhood, single mothers who needed flexible work schedules. Jin Woo's business advisor had helped her set up proper accounting systems, tax structures, even a retirement plan. It was legitimate, profitable, and growing. Amara attended the Woodward Academy now, one of Atlanta's premier private schools. Her tuition, books, uniforms, and extracurricular activities were covered by an anonymous scholarship that Keisha suspected came from the same source as her other good fortune. The little girl who'd run through the streets in terror was now thriving, making friends, excelling in her classes, particularly in mathematics and creative writing. But the most unexpected change was the ritual that developed every Sunday. Every Sunday at exactly 10:00 a.m., a black Mercedes S-Class would pull up outside Amara's bakery. Park Jin-woo would step out, dressed more casually than his usual business attire, still expensive, but in pressed jeans and a polo shirt rather than suits. He would enter the bakery, and Amara would light up, running from whatever she was doing to greet him. "Mr. Park! Mr. Park! I got an A on my math test. Mr. Park, look at the picture I drew. It's a tiger. Mr. Park, Mama made your favorite lemon bars today." Jin-woo would order a coffee, always black, always in a ceramic mug rather than paper, and whatever pastry Amara recommended that day. Then he would sit at a corner table, away from the window, and read the newspaper for exactly 1 hour. Sometimes Amara would do her homework at the same table, occasionally asking him questions about math problems or Korean culture. She'd become fascinated with Korea after learning where he was from. Sometimes she would just talk, telling him about school, her friends, her dreams of becoming a teacher. Jin-woo would listen, occasionally offering advice or asking questions, but mostly just being present. A silent guardian, a constant reminder that she was safe, that someone powerful cared about her well-being. Keisha watched these Sunday visits with a mixture of gratitude and trepidation. She knew who Jin-woo was, had heard the rumors about his business activities, but she also saw how he was with Amara, patient, kind, genuinely interested in her development. He never asked for anything in return, never made inappropriate demands, never leveraged his generosity for control. He simply showed up, week after week, a constant presence in their lives. One Sunday, about 6 months after that night, Keisha finally worked up the courage to sit down at Jinwoo's table during his visit. Amara was in the back, helping one of the other bakers frost cupcakes. "Mr. Park," Keisha said hesitantly, "I need to ask you something. Why are you doing all this? The bakery? Amara's school? These visits? You barely know us. Why?" Jinwoo was quiet for a long moment, his coffee cooling in front of him. Finally, he spoke in that quiet, accented voice. "I had a sister once, Ji-eun. She was brave, like your daughter. When our family was in danger, she ran through dangerous streets to find me, to get help. But I was too far away. Too late. She died before I could save her." He looked up, and Keisha saw genuine pain in his eyes. "For 15 years, I've lived with that failure. I've built walls around myself, refused to care about anyone, because caring means you can lose them, and losing them destroys you." Jinwoo gestured toward the back, where they could hear Amara laughing. "But then your daughter burst into my lounge, grabbed my sleeve, and looked at me with the same desperate courage Ji-eun showed. In that moment, I had a choice. I could turn away, protect myself from caring, from feeling, or I could be the person Ji-eun needed me to be 15 years ago. I could be on time this time." Keisha's eyes filled with tears. "You saved our lives." "No," Jinwoo said firmly. Amara saved her own life and yours. She had the courage to ask for help when she needed it. I simply had the resources to provide it, and in doing so, she saved something in me that I thought was dead forever. He finished his coffee and stood, preparing to leave as he always did after exactly 1 hour. I don't expect you to understand my world, Mrs. Williams. I don't expect you to approve of how I make my living. But I can promise you this. As long as I draw breath, no one will hurt you or Amara again. She created a connection that night, a jong, that I cannot and will not break. As Jin Woo walked toward the door, Amara came running from the back, holding a box. Mr. Park, wait, I made you something. Inside the box was a carefully decorated cupcake with messy but enthusiastic frosting work. On top, written in shaky letters with icing, were the words, "Thank you." Jinwoo looked at the cupcake, at Amara's hopeful face, and felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in 15 years. Something warm and painful and precious all at once. "It's perfect," he said quietly. "Thank you, Amara." As he drove away, the cupcake carefully placed in a bag on his passenger seat, Jin-woo thought about the strange turns life could take. How a single moment of choosing compassion over calculation could change everything. How the smallest voices could carry the greatest power to awaken sleeping consciences. He thought about Ji-eun, about the 15 years he'd spent building walls around his heart, convinced that feeling nothing was the only way to survive. And he thought about Amara, who'd somehow broken through those walls with nothing but desperate courage and innocent trust. That night, for the first time since Ji-eun's death, Jin-woo visited her grave. He placed the cupcake on her headstone and spoke to his sister in Korean, telling her about Amara, about being given a second chance to be the person she'd needed him to be. "I was too late for you," he whispered, "but I was on time for her. I hope that means something. I hope you can forgive me." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and Jinwoo chose to believe it was his sister's way of answering. Some debts could never be fully repaid, some failures never completely redeemed, but perhaps the best way to honor the people we couldn't save was to save the ones we still could. In the end, Amara Williams didn't just find help that rainy Friday night. She found family. And Park Jin-woo, the man who'd spent 15 years convinced he was incapable of human connection, learned that sometimes the smallest hands carry the greatest power to heal the deepest wounds. Sometimes all it takes is one moment of choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, compassion over calculation. Sometimes salvation comes not from grand gestures, but from showing up consistently, week after week, with coffee and cupcakes and quiet presence. Sometimes the smallest voices remind us what it means to be human. Thanks for watching. And remember, in a world that often feels dark and dangerous, there are still people willing to answer when someone cries for help. Be one of those people.